delighted that we have managed to get Liz Robinson back, who I think we found absolutely fascinating when you came on first time, Liz. So welcome back.
Thank you.
Yes, that's great. And Stan, how are you this morning?
I've had better nights, but let's just move on from that.
It's when you get little messages from sort of virus protection agencies and things like that in the middle of the night saying that your account has been hacked or something like that. It is difficult to get back to sleep after that, isn't it, Stan?
Your details are being sold online.
They're not worth much, Stan, anyway. So I mean, anyway, so yeah, so it's it's been another week, isn't it? I mean, this is we keep saying this, the government keeps on giving in terms of these chats. We're never short of news to talk about. So we're going to do the regular what's caught your eye. So we're going to start with Stan. So what's caught your eye this week?
Well, the comings and goings, I think, at 10 Downing, so I don't think you can miss that amongst everything else. But I think it was on Twitter, but somebody may have sent it me, a Turkish proverb, which is, when a clown enters a palace, the clown doesn't become a king, the palace becomes a circus. And I think that sums up, as a proverb, summing up where we are at the moment. I think that's really clear. And what I love the spin, I love seeing how people can turn things around, and to spin 4 resignations from your senior aides to, oh yes, this is what I promised, to be clearing out everybody and bringing a whole new thing in, is just unbelievable. And there was at least 4, I think, almost identical tweets last night from MPs saying exactly the same thing. And you just think, where is your integrity? Where is it?
In a school setting, it's like, if it always feels to me as if, you know, a head teacher or a senior leader just making a load of mistakes, you know, just one after the other, and that sort of corrosive confidence, you know, just oozes out, doesn't it? And you do get to a point where you think, actually, this is just too embarrassing to stick around with, you know. And I mean, in a school setting, well, I think there probably is a lot more integrity, because I think people then decide that actually I am the blocker, it is me, you know. I'm finding this too difficult. I need
also a lot more accountability.
Yes, yeah.
You know, people, there's been lots of Twitter sort of comparisons, haven't there, with an Ofsted inspection that criticises leadership management. I mean, I always used to say that as a head, you know, with Ofsted, that there's one person's name, there's one staff member's name in an Ofsted report, and that's the head teacher. I said, and only one person ever loses their job after a bad inspection, and that's the head teacher. So that there is that. I mean, that's not a good thing. I wouldn't say particularly it's overdone, but there is more accountability. So what does he have to do to be held to account?
Yeah, I mean, well, like Jimmy Savile.
I cut and pasted her report into an Ofsted format and sent it to Frank, who objected to the overall judgment, because using Sue Gray's overall judgment was not special measures, it was requires improvement, because that's what she says at the end of her report.
And of course the point I was making, well, how worse does it have to get?
It can't get worse
before it is judged inadequate. But yeah, I accept your point there, Stan, that yeah, but in a way that it's, I suppose, in a sense, whatever revisions to that report happened, you know, must have reflected, there must have been some consideration about, well, what is left in the report, you know, because it's no good having like a special measures school report, but actually all the special measures bits stripped out. When you read that, it doesn't quite read like special measures, does it? It reads more like a requires improvement or even a sort of adequate type of situation. But Jimmy Savile did it for me. I really found that, you know, quite distasteful, really.
Well, it's interesting that that's the bit that actually pushed his very loyal aide over the edge, that I can't cope with.
But it is like the Trump tactics, isn't it? Because now it's just put in people's brains that somehow Keir Starmer had something to do with that.
Yes,
it's out there, and you can't undo that. You know, however much you object to it, it's sort of in people's consciousness.
Yeah, it's like a little worm, isn't it? It is. Yeah.
Disgusting politics.
Yeah. So what caught your eye this week, Liz?
Well, hopefully something a bit more uplifting and inspiring. You used the word integrity there, Stan. I've been listening to the new Brené Brown book, which is called Rising Strong, which I'm a big fan of. And she talks about leading big. And given that I run a leadership program called the Big Leadership Adventure, we call Big Education, this of course perked up my ears. And what she means by big leadership is B for boundaries, I for integrity, and G for generosity. So I really found that very helpful thought in terms of boundaries. To me, that's all about how do we set expectations, which is something, you know, I do a lot of work on kind of contracting, agreeing, making those expectations explicit, having, you know, constructive ways of talking about whether or not those expectations are being met. And she talks about a lot about resentment, and though that's when those boundaries aren't being respected or they're not clarified.
Do you find, I mean, I find that interesting because that's not around appraisal, is it, or anything like that? That's more, or where does it all sit? How does that sort of, how are those boundaries actually established? I can see people sort of demonstrating them, you know, but actually what, you know, that people don't sort of generally go completely over the boundary. They sort of venture across the boundary slightly, you know. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's it's so true. I think in school settings, where do they come from? And on one level, you can say a contract, you know, your contract of employment is that, and people will test that boundary in terms of sickness, absence, or, you know, what, you know, other ways, people being late, you know, those are all examples, aren't they, of testing those boundaries. You know, in a more sort of detailed way, you've got things like staff code of conduct. And I do a lot of work kind of individually or with teams of people doing that kind of contracting, actually about how do we want to work together, what's okay around here, and making some of those kind of cultural norms explicit and exploring them. And, you know, with people doing home working and so on, we've done a lot of that, of kind of what's the right way to communicate, you know, how do we break it up, etc., etc. So I suppose the point is this lovely phrase someone taught me about silent traditions. So silent traditions, they go without saying because they come without saying. You know, so we have that phrase, or it goes without saying. It's like, well, things go without saying because they come without saying. So if we don't talk about those things, make them explicit, that's where, you know, cultural, habitual things that may or may not be okay for individuals and indeed for the organisation kind of creep in. So I always think, how do we make the untalkable about talkable about, right? So those things, oh, you know, the niggles that your husband or your partner or whatever knows all about that problem because you're like at home, but you don't actually ever have the conversation with space to say, right, senior leadership team, you know, we're supposed to start our meetings at 7:30 and we never start before 7:45. What are we going to do about that? You know, just have those conversations.
It's that embedded nature of goodness, though, isn't it? There is that sense of, in a way, is interesting. When we were talking in the sort of 2005, we were looking at creating a new sort of inspection framework and wanted to have sort of more embedded practice. Outstanding schools being, there was no term such as outstanding at the time, but these are places where everything is embedded, you know, so that even there's been change of senior leadership, even change of head teacher, you know, the school is still very, very productive. It's still very effective. You know, those were the sorts of places that we were trying to highlight to get to some of that, I think. But actually, we lost it, completely lost it. You know, because some person's view about how well embedded something is really can only be tested when there is that significant change. You know,
totally. I mean, I know we're supposed to be talking about what caught our eye, but I'll tell you a story about that. When I had been in my headship for about 5 years, and we'd just gone through an amalgamation. I've been head of the junior school, which was judged outstanding, took on an infant school, and done through this amalgamation process. And both myself and my very trusted deputy fell pregnant, but at just exactly this, our older children are 5 weeks apart. So at quite a fragile time for the school, we were then both off on maternity leave. But I had, you know, the mark of a good leader, in a sense, what you're saying, Frank, is that you can kind of walk away and everything doesn't just continue, but grows and flourishes. Well, first maternity leave, I came back and really, that was not the case. And it was the most bruising and humbling experience because, you know, outstanding, and you know, I'd been asked by the local authority to become an NLE, and you know, you've got all this stuff, and then suddenly it was like, literally my first day back, we got an Ofsted call, and it was fine. We got a good for the new primary school, but it was such a marker of how deeply things have to be embedded, and because we'd gone through that amalgamation process, just things weren't as embedded, and it made me take that notion of shared responsibility and shared accountability through the school to a totally different level. And so yeah, super interesting. And that in a nutshell, the reflection that myself and Nicola, my then deputy, who's now the head at Surrey Square, had was that we were the custodians of excellence.
Yeah, that's a lovely word.
Yeah, we held the line, and even though there were so many capable, brilliant people, without us there, somehow it just,
yes,
you know, and so we very intentionally worked with the senior team and then the wider team to say, how do we get everybody to be a custodian of excellence in this school, you know, raising the pride, raising the sense of responsibility. This is not something that can be held by the people at the top, because it just demonstrated how fragile that was. So very interesting.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Go on, Stan.
I was just saying, this week I was, as a governor, in a visioning exercise with the school I'm a governor, and the whole exercise was led by a governor, although the head introduced it, but they've just come to the end of the last 10-year plan, which he instigated, and the visioning exercises for the next 10 years. But he started by saying, you know, the head teacher's getting on a bit. So what we've got to do when we devise this 10-year plan is it's got to be able to survive a complete change of leadership. I have to say, I was most impressed by the governor who led it, because there were parents, staff, governors, church, local businesses, all represented and all thinking about 10 years from now. And he managed the whole thing really well. But what got to me was I've worked with so many schools and said, stop using outstanding as a phrase, find another word.
Yes.
And I've never been able to find that right word. And he just put a slide up that said, we want our school to be a remarkable school.
Yeah.
I thought, remarkable, why have I not been able to find that word? Excellent. To say, you know, this is what we want to be. In 10 years' time, we want people looking at our school and saying,
Challenge partners have that, they flipped it, haven't they? They have their standout schools rather than outstanding.
Yeah, so Liz, we interrupted you. I think you're just on B.
So yeah, boundaries. So the other two she talks about, one is integrity, and I think, Stan, we've already kind of covered quite a lot of that. And then the other one, generosity. The thing that really struck me about that is she talks about the story I'm telling myself about that. So, you know, something happens, someone annoys you or whatever, and you make up a story. Oh, they're probably this, and you know. And so, firstly, noticing that in yourself, that you're making up a story before you actually know what is what. Right. But also the generosity framing, that people are doing their best at that moment, and that doesn't mean that their best is good enough or that has to be acceptable to you, but it changes your stance if you are able to tap into that generous, compassionate stance, that they are doing their best at that moment, because as a starting point for then addressing what the challenge is, it just gets you to tell a different story, rather than one of blame and criticism or judgment. So inspiring.
A good example of that, Liz, is when people say, or I know people like her or him. I've worked with people like that before, and therefore I know how they're going to behave and why they're doing it. And there's no connection between people you've known in the past and this person's story. And yet we all do it. Oh, I know, I can tell exactly what they're going to be like. And we can't really.
People in a box.
Yeah.
And you know, it's a judgment thing. And
and then we build our own solution to it without actually knowing what the problem was in the first place.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, for me, what's caught my eye this week is New York University offering a Taylor Swift course. And anybody who's watched these videos will know that I'm not a great Taylor Swift fan. Well, I wasn't until the Folklore album came out, and the follow-up album as well. and it's not I suppose in a sense I do that genre of music I like where she's at the moment, but actually it's the poetry in her lyrics that is really the thing that appeals to me. And it was interesting talking to my son-in-law who basically he never listens to lyrics. To him it's all about beat, rhythm, that element of it. So he's quite happy listening. We were doing some decorating last week. He's quite happy just listening to a bass sound, a deep bass pounding away. And he doesn't. And we've tried. My daughter and I tried to educate him to the value or the sort of interest of music. No, of music that actually has lyrics. So it's like it's in a way only listening to half the song. So I would be really interested in. I would put my name down for a New York University Taylor Swift course. But of course, that then puts me at odds with all of those people who think that actually there's no way that course can be rigorous. There's no way. There's no way that course could actually do any comparison between Taylor Swift and, say, a 19th century poet, English poet. There's no way that you would do that, is there? Actually, I'm pretty certain that's where they will go, in terms of analysing what this is all about. So I think it's really important that we look at opportunity and interest as part of an important element of what a good sort of curriculum looks like. That's where I've been going with it, because it appeals to me. I want to do it. I'm interested in it. I'm going to probably be taken down roads that I didn't think I was going to be taken down, and suddenly I'm in 19th century poetry, English poets.
Is it a correspondence course, Frank? Because you could sign up. I
could sign up. I haven't looked. I will need to. Anyway, let's move off Taylor Swift. This week, we've had the big levelling up paper, haven't we? And well, if we move past too much of it, too much, in my opinion, has been made of the 3 pages of the fall of the Roman Empire. But actually within it, there's some really important things. And so, there are some standout things for me, like this. A UK National Academy is an interesting idea, in terms of trying to look at the experiences that young people have being much broader than just the lessons that they have or the exams they take. So but there are some real sort of, like, for me, I want to take this platform to say I'm deeply worried about what's happening about the opportunity areas. I'm heavily involved in the one in Blackpool, and we have got some improvements which we think have only been able to be achieved because of a collaborative approach and a proper level of investment in areas that the local area felt were important. So in effect, I think that's something that is a real concern, because I cannot see the funding for the 55 education investment areas, of which Blackpool is going to be thrown into that pot as well. So I think there's a real, if there is a thinking going on here within government that, oh, well, these opportunity areas that they've been running for 4.5 years, everything should be embedded now. Well, actually, I think that underlines their lack of awareness of how deeply troubled and rooted this level of deprivation is, and the lack of investment over so many years has been. So it feels as though the rug's being taken from under us, to be honest. I'm deeply worried about it.
Well, I think Michael Gove would fail on his own paper, wouldn't he? Because rumour has it, big chunks of it are taken straight from Wikipedia. And there certainly are repeated sentences and repeated paragraphs because it's not been proofread.
Yeah. The problem with this is that in government, this is the big thing, but actually it's not been the big thing, is it? It's not. If you were Michael Gove, there's this sort of sideshow going on as well around your leadership. It's like being the head of head of curriculum in a secondary school, and actually having to deliver to staff on a curriculum, major proposal, when actually the senior leadership team are falling out and there's a big row with the governors, and some of the parents don't. This is a bit of a. It's clearly these people have wanted, I suspect, to give it everything, but actually they probably haven't had the time. They haven't had the space. The brain has not been able to cope with all the other stuff that's been going on.
I suspect it's been really rushed at the last minute as well, which is why you get a document that has, the second paragraph, I think there's a sentence that's exactly the same as the sentence in the first about Jericho being the first, you know, and you think anybody who reads that sees that in, so it's not been read by somebody with any ability to.
No, but you know, I know how, well, we all know how this works. That would have had to have gone to the Prime Minister's office, wouldn't it? That paper would have had to have been cleared at that level. And and I suspect that would have had to have been cleared at Cabinet as well. But actually, or there would have been a timeline for the delivery of that report. You know, let's give credit to Gove and his colleagues. That was delivered on time, but then it got snarled up.
Yeah.
And we've all had that. We've all had that, I'm sure. But you said you give it back to us, you know, 3 weeks ago. It's got to be done. It's out in 3 days.
Yeah.
You know, what the hell's going on? You know, I'm pretty certain that's what's happened here.
Totally. I mean, the reflection on kind of, you know, the current government is damning, really. I mean, I think in terms of what's needed, though, and, you know, Frank, you've got so much experience from the work in Blackpool and of these kind of collective, long-term, place-based intervention, not collaborative interventions. To me, the fundamental problem is that there's just nothing attractive about that from a political point of view. The work that's needed is deeply non-soundbite, not quick, not straightforward, not kind of, you know, silver bullets. It's complex, it's long-term, it's collaborative, it's multi-agency, and it's difficult. And that's and the areas, I think, where there's been the most progress, and it needs visionary leadership, unquestionably. So, you know, Doncaster, I'm not an expert on this. Yeah. Doncaster, and how I see it, you've got Damien Allen there, a real visionary leader who's brought things in. He's connected globally. You know, people like Beres, Nixon there. You know, really system leadership in action, collaborative, long-term planning, visioning, and galvanizing all the resources. Now that is, you know, that is not an easy policy to even create, or, you know, fund is another matter. But, you know, so the opportunity areas, as we know, have been a mixed success.
Yes.
So and the metrics around this, you know, that's just the core problem. So how these things are quantified in terms of their success, and partly that's about timescales, but it's also about the type of metrics that people are looking at. You know, if you're just looking at certain metrics and certain timescales, it's lacking. It lacks sophistication to understand the complexity of the change that's needed and the work that's needed. And, you know, then there's inadequate tools to even kind of articulate that. So that is the real problem, is levelling up. It's about red wall voters who want obvious. I'm sorry, I don't mean that sounds insulting to red wall voters. I mean, there needs to be tangible, you know, this. And I don't see that in terms of what actually is going to work, there aren't those kind of soundbite.
No, you're right, because actually, you know, children improving their reading nobody sees that,
right?
You know, but actually a new shopping centre, everybody sees the new shopping centre, you know. And actually the thing for me on the opportunity areas was, you know, there was no template for these. There was a broad approach towards, we'll have a key leader, we'll bring some key leaders from the area together. No one said to us, it's got to be about this. It's got to, actually, it was a genuine openness to identifying what those areas thought were the important things for their area. The fact that some of them haven't achieved quite as much as others is really not surprising, because actually we should be now moving on to the next stage and saying, well, actually, some of these have been more successful than others. You know, what we learned, what we're going to do going forward. But there's nothing like that. And they're very clear that I think my view is that the education investment areas are not follow-up opportunity areas, you know, because I just don't think there's the capacity to do that, to do opportunity areas in 55 places across the country. It's just going to be, you know, everybody for themselves. And I think one of the things that has helped in the opportunity areas is we've had a team of civil servants linked to the opportunity area based in the area. You know, and and somebody mentioned to me, do you remember when there used to be government offices in the regions? I do. I'm old enough to remember that. But actually, in a way, what Blackpool's had a bit of a government office created in its city, in its town, and that's worked with some of the key leaders. And the only other thing I want to say is, if you don't put money in it, it doesn't drag people out of the trenches.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, so actually that drew people in. Oh, there's a pot of money. What have we got to do to? Can we chat to you about what we can do with it? No money. People think, oh well, what's the point? You know, what's the point of attending?
It's got to be money over the long term, Frank. That's
Yeah.
the other thing about these things. They're never really long term enough to embed. So, you know, we're talking visionary. By the very nature of something's visionary means it's going to take some time to implement, to get it embedded and to get it working. And I would have thought anything as big as that needs 10 years.
Yeah.
A 10-year plan that throws in lots of.
What's interesting, there's I think where philanthropy is going, philanthropic funding is moving to generally much longer times. So, you know, like the Porticus funded work around reducing exclusions, which is a 10-year very sophisticated way of thinking about trying to shift the dial on something. You know, doing some work with an interesting foundation in Bath and North Somerset, where again they've got a 10-year plan for raising, you know, the achievement of every child in that region to national expectations and above over primary over a 10-year period. And you think, yeah, you're going to do that because it's so systemic and properly done. I think what as you were talking, Frank, about the whole thing with the opportunity areas, it made me think of, you know, user-centered design, and that approach to being close to the users, posting things, what actually are the barriers, not sitting somewhere thinking you think you know what it is, but actually being in the communities, convening those conversations, listening, as Citizens UK would be saying, to understand that and co-creating solutions. Sounds like a bunch of jargon, but that's where I think the most fruitful work is. But one of the implications of that kind of iterative user-centered design is that you try things and you pilot things and sometimes they don't work, but that is okay because you're learning something. And I think your point there, Stan, as you say about you know, some of the opportunity areas were more successful than others, you know, that of course, because when you're trying something new, some things work better than others. But what's critical, as you say, Frank, is the reflection, the learning, the gathering of those insights, because that's when you start your next, you know, if you do the double diamond, or that's your next bit, is kind of, you've got to do the in bit of the diamond, which is the capturing the learning and the insights, which is just invaluable, which then informs the next iteration. But I think in public service, there's a sort of very, you know, difficult relationship with things not having gone well. So and that's to do with high stakes accountability and exposure, but it's also a mindset, which is, oh, if something hasn't gone well, we'll sort of shut it down and move on, as opposed to, oh, well, that's really important, what can we learn from that? That sprung into my brain another connection, which is we opened a secondary school, a free school, which then had to be closed because it never got the site, and it was deeply traumatic and upsetting experience for everybody involved, including me. And I was asking the DfE at the time, it's like, well, are we not doing a lessons learned thing here? And at the most senior levels, asking those questions, like, this has been, you know, a very difficult experience, and the students who stayed with us for 5 years got good outcomes, and that's great, but like, very, very difficult situation. Are we doing a lessons learned exercise here? No. Success is that it's finished and there's minimal exposure on risks.
I think that's also really important when something's a success as well, that you do lesson, you know, how have this, why have we managed to do that? I know when and I'm not saying I did all this, but when we turned around this toxic organization, I asked a couple of the admin team to do an investigation to say, how did it work? Why did we able to turn around an organization that lost £2.5 million in 3 years and make it profitable in 2 years? You know, how was that possible? And they did, you know, a full investigation, and we wrote a report that said, you know, turning around an organization.
And that's where, just because we couldn't go without talking about Ofsted, I know we probably need to stop soon, but that reflective capability at an individual level and an organisation and a systemic level is what is so critical. And that's where the inspector, that is another, in my view, toxic implication, which is that we look outside for the judgment about, you know, or the criteria and the process of whether something's been successful, as opposed to individually developing those reflective capabilities to evaluate how something's gone, and as you say, Stan, kind of articulate and codify when things go well as when things don't go well. And that's about knowledge generation on behalf of the system, isn't it?
It is.
That learning, but we put the locus, so many people put the locus outside of themselves. Oh, will you tell me? And that all that top-down accountability within trusts, within local authorities, you're telling me, as opposed to individual teachers, learning assistants, the whole thing, saying, no, I can articulate what's going well and not well in my practice, and then engage in a professional discussion about that, as opposed to somebody telling me from the outside.
Yeah. I mean, I was the big fan of self-evaluation within inspection, and that's the heart of that, isn't it? Is actually, tell us, what are your issues? Be honest with us. Tell us what's not going well. We might be able to help you, but you won't do that if actually you end up feeling as though somebody from outside, a force outside, is going to judge as to whether or not what you've done is the right thing. It might be that this is part of the process, the iterative process of finding out what is the right thing. I also feel as though the thing around this is the number of schools that are falling apart. I remember when I was at uni, we saw a panorama program or a television program about William Tyndale, where basically the school had fallen apart, and actually there was also the one in Halifax, can't remember the secondary school what it's called, the Ridings, where there a lot of mention made about that as well. And actually, there are 20,000 schools. There are going to be some that are going to be, are going to fall over. You do need to have some mechanism of actually identifying those and actually giving support to those schools, because it's not about, you can't close the school. Well, you might try, but actually it's much better to try and keep the thing going, and to do it in such a way that, we're going to identify this requires, that phrase, this school requires special measures in order to provide a satisfactory education. Well, actually, the way this is worked out, the special measures are, you get rid of everybody, you bring a new team in. That is, that it's about actually helping that school, isn't it? So for me, it's around self-evaluation as the heart of all this, and that would get us away from the regular inspection. If we could think about school inspection as a sort of safety net, rather than something that's just got to judge everything, and we get it into a conversation with external inspectors coming in, talking and challenging.
We tried some peer, not inspection, but peer support, if you like, but a supported, it was secondary, head teachers going into other schools, but not inspecting, finding out if what the school was doing of their key issues were the right things. So there was no judgment as to whether the school was achieving or not. It was, are the things you are doing working, and are they the right things that you need to be doing to hit what you want to do with your own targets? So it was just an outside critical friend, not saying your English isn't good enough, your maths results aren't good enough, because everybody could see that there's no skill in that, but saying, but what are you doing about it, and is that working, and is that actually solving your problem? I don't know how that went, because I left the authority just as that was kicking off, but it was just that idea that you can go into as a peer assessor and not be about what the results are. It's about what are you doing, and is it working?
Liz, we'll let you finish, because you were going to say something there.
Well, two quick things on that. One, I totally agree about peer review, and we've done a lot of work with the Schools Partnership Programme, Education Development Trust. The mantra of that is improving, not proving, which I love. So going in from a learning stance, which is just a totally different mentality. The other thing I was just going to briefly say about accountability, I totally agree about self-evaluation. Many internal school accountability quality assurance processes are far more brutal than Ofsted. Because I always say that, at least Ofsted lets you self-evaluate.
Yes.
Are you actually letting your teachers self-evaluate their work and telling you about their work, or are you going in and making a bunch of judgments? And by far, it's the latter. And so we hate it as head teachers, often come in and judge us. Well, at least you get to self-evaluate and tell your story. Are you extending that to your teachers? It's a really fundamental question, something we've done a lot of work on, actually. So yeah, if anyone's interested to
that's a really good point. I'd just like to say, because I was part of the training that Ofsted rolled out on self-evaluation, which was actually sort of co-titled The Internal Inspector. So it was based on a model that you describe as really poor practice. It was based on a model that the senior leadership team would inspect their own school.
Yeah.
And that's really important, that we don't play the part that we like.
Totally agree.
That's really good.
I'm gonna have to bring it to a close. Liz, come back again. I mean, if anybody watching is interested in the work you do, obviously just search for Big Education.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to connecting with people. We're running a number of courses and programs and helping people try and step outside of some of the sort of stuff that we've got stuck in through the system we're in. So,
are you managing that though? Our colleagues, you know, when you go down this road, people are ready to see the, you know, to do it in a different way, to sort of see education as not something confined by somebody else's view of what it should look like.
No, I mean, we're growing and expanding all the time, so it's a very exciting place to be. Big Leadership Adventure, our flagship leadership program, seeing as you're inviting me to do a plug, Frank, thanks. Yeah, it's growing every year. It's a national program, and one of those sessions makes your heart sing, being in that group. Also working intensively with school teams through a program called the Big Team Adventure, going in and working with the whole SLT over a series of sessions, which is really helping schools kind of leapfrog and move forward. And then we've got a number of blended online courses now, kind of at some of those key pivotal practices that we think can help people shift their practice. So we love Tim Brighouse, who talks about find the gaps in the hedges, and that's what we've done, is sort of think, right, there's lots you can do in the current sector. We have a very high stakes accountability system, but we also have massive amount of freedom compared to any jurisdiction around the world. So how can we use those freedoms to further an education that is more aligned to our purpose and values?
Fabulous.
Thanks, Frank.
All right. Well, I'll bring it to a close there. And it's been a fascinating Friday morning for us. So I hope those watching and listening gain something from it. And if you are interested in Liz's work, you know, just reach out to her. I'm sure she'll respond positively to you. So okay, so thank you all very much, and we'll see you all being well next week.
Next Friday.